Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and do a full, thorough comparison between all of the $1,000 iPhones that Apple has dropped within the last several years. So we have the iPhone 10 all the way at the end, the iPhone 10s, the iPhone 10, which is right here. So I must have gotten these two mixed up. So now we are back to normal. So the iPhone 10, iPhone 10s, iPhone 11 Pro, iPhone 12 Pro, 13 Pro, and iPhone 14 Pro. Now, I plan on switching over to the 14 Pro at some point, but I've used every single one of these phones as my main device. I'm still using the 13 Pro right now. I will switch over to the 14 Pro at some point, but just to kind of do a quick little thing, just look at how similar every single one of these iPhones' design was up until the iPhone 10 to the 14 Pro. Now, starting with the iPhone 10, what I want to showcase to you all, this was the first iPhone in 2017 to actually bring a notch design. Now, ever since then, almost every single one of these iPhones has looked identical, but this was the first $1,000 iPhone Apple has ever made. And looking at it now, it's actually pretty insane because the price tag has stayed consistent, but I feel like Apple has done less and less to differentiate the models. From 2017 to 2018, with the iPhone 10s, there really wasn't a crazy big difference. Externally, it was the same exact design, but we did end up getting a really cool gold color, which I liked. But we also ended up getting 4 gigabytes of RAM inside of this, and I guess the Apple A12 Bionic chip was a pretty big upgrade, considering it's gotten so many more features than the iPhone 10 in terms of software. Now, something like the iPhone 11 Pro, in my opinion, as I've talked about for many, many years now, this is probably the best upgrade Apple has ever made. From the 10s to the iPhone 11 Pro, this 2019 $1,000 iPhone was a beautiful iPhone. Internally, it got some really big upgrades, but externally, with the back, this was the first time we saw a frosted glass back on any iPhone. I think there were some other Samsung products or some other devices that had it, but this was the first time we saw it on an iPhone, and this gold color with this frosted glass back was amazing. We also got a triple camera setup on this iPhone as well. That was a really big difference. Internally also, 4 gigabytes of RAM, still a very fast chipset with the Apple A13 Bionic, and Apple knocked it out of the park, I think, in 2019. Now with the 2020 iPhone 12 Pro that I used this phone as well, this is the same exact one I had, I think this was a good upgrade in the body standpoint. Internally, very small differences. It had a smaller battery than the 11 Pro, more RAM, which was nice, but I will say the body of this iPhone, this phone feels like a slab of gold. From the 11 Pro to the 12 Pro, Apple did make some pretty big changes, which I was really happy about, but internally there was that battery health issue that this iPhone had, which I wasn't really that big of a fan of. But regardless, this iPhone is still, I think, a really big change in the body department. And then we get the iPhone 13 Pro. This was, in my opinion, a monumental change back in 2021. This was a crazy good iPhone that Apple released, and I'm so happy. For one, they kept the same body, but they did end up bringing a way better camera setup on this iPhone with a way bigger camera module. I'll show you the differences in a second between all of them, but this was a massive camera difference, which I was really happy about. Now, on top of that, Apple ended up bringing that ProMotion display, which that in and of itself changed so many things. I think Apple knocked it out of the park as well with this type of design. The design stayed consistent between kind of all of them. This one still had the notch, but honestly, they added ProMotion. They added a way bigger battery, not way bigger, but they improved battery life like crazy. And this was a monumental change in my opinion as well. Now this brings us to the iPhone 14 Pro. This is this next step up, the latest $1,000 phone from Apple. And they did one thing that I think most people are going to talk about. One, they did go ahead and give us the dynamic island display. Since the iPhone 10, that $1,000 phone from 2017, that was the first time Apple even kind of remotely did something different with the notch. From the 13 Pro, they did decrease the size of the notch a little bit, but between these two, this is where we are at now. And in my opinion, I would be more comfortable with the notch than with the iPhone 14 Pro. I will say the dynamic island is nice and everything, but it is cool, I will say, from a 5-year difference. If we look at these two iPhones, just look at how different these designs are now. We have a curved back or curved side, which is nice, versus the flat side on the iPhone 14 Pro, which looks great. The camera modules have grown extensively crazy, which is insane. These don't even look like the same phones. Like, these are like completely different lineups, it looks like. The frosted glass back feels very good. But I do feel like with the display, Apple could have done a little bit of a better job. We do have things like the always-on display, which is more software, but I feel like Apple could have done a little bit of a better job when it comes down, when it comes down to the display now. Now with the 10s, I think Apple have the same wallpaper. I feel like with the 10s, same exact type of design. Maybe the display got a little bit brighter than the iPhone 10s, but these two, if you look at them, kind of it's a big difference for sure and everywhere else, but the display, I feel like, again, Apple could have done a little bit of a better job with that specific dynamic island. And even with something like the 11 Pro, this is where things I think start getting a little bit more common. This was the last iPhone we got that was a 5.8 inch, that was a 5.8 inch AMOLED display. But I will say for the most part, I do like having the frosted glass back. The glass back on the iPhone 11 Pro feels more frosted though than the iPhone 14 Pro. But if you look at the back of these two, there's a lot of similarity, which is good. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you look at back at these, both of these iPhones, Apple knocked it out of the park with the 11 Pro, but you can tell how different these gold colors are. The iPhone 11 Pro gold color looks more like orange. The 14 Pro's gold color looks more like silver. So they kind of like flip-flopped here a little bit. But then with the 12 Pro, this is where things start getting even way more similar. I mean, we got the frosted glass back and everything. We did get the, flat sides on both them, which I think was great. But I will say this is where things started getting interesting because Apple took I think the more of the Samsung approach and started increasing their sizes a little bit. So we did finally get that 6.1 inch Super Retina XDR OLED panel on the iPhone, 12 Pro. So these two sizes are the same. The 14 Pro is a little bit smaller, I would say, and a little bit more curved. That's kind of the selling points, I guess, of the 14 Pro. But still, with that dynamic island, I just don't even think it's that good of a thing. I feel like this is more of a, it's more of an inconvenience, I would say, than even the notch on the iPhone 12 Pro. I think Apple did it right with the iPhone 13 Pro. This was a really, really big difference from the 12 Pro in my opinion, but I feel like between these two, Apple could have done a little bit of a better job when it comes down to that notch. If we go and zoom into the notch a little bit, right? I'm not going to go super crazy. If we go and just take a look at the notch here, and we look at the dynamic island, I feel like, again, Apple could have done a little bit of a better job with at least making the dynamic island a little bit smaller, making it more like a hole punch. But for them making it like this, I'm not a fan of that at all. I feel like the notch sits better than the dynamic island. If we go into make our way over to something like whatever, if we go and go into our notes application, I mean, I do understand what Apple is trying to do, but this is more in your face than this is. I do feel like, I mean, it even extends the status bar, it seems like a little bit more further down. It cuts into content more, and it's more of an inconvenience, I would say, than what the iPhone 13 Pro with that notch design is trying to do. So I will say, when it kind of comes down to it with the iPhone 13 Pro, with the iPhone 14 Pro, I think Apple did a decent job with the iPhone 14 Pro. I don't think it's the greatest iPhone ever made. I feel like when we kind of look at all these iPhones, they're $1,000 phones from 2017 onwards, we kind of see an interesting thing. I feel like the iPhone 10, the originator of that $1,000 phone, was a really big upgrade. I think the iPhone 10s, not really that big of an upgrade. I think the 11 Pro was a really, really big upgrade. I think the 12 Pro really wasn't that big of an upgrade. I think the iPhone 13 Pro was a really big upgrade. And then I think the iPhone 14 Pro is not that big of an upgrade. So it is kind of like we are getting an S styling, an S release every other year. The 10, full number, deserves it. 10S deserves the S, I truly believe. The 11 Pros, not deserves a full number. I mean, we got the frosted glass back, triple camera setup, better processor, 4 gigabytes of RAM, decent phone. I mean, this is a really good phone, way better battery life too. Then the 12 Pro, if it wasn't for the flat sides, I really don't think this would be that big of an upgrade either. And in some ways, because of the battery size, it was kind of a downgrade. So that was kind of an S upgrade. The 13 Pro, we got way better cameras, we got way better battery life, and we got a ProMotion display. That was a really big deal with the 13 Pro. Now with the 14 Pro, I think this is more of an S upgrade. I think with the display, the always on display, okay, it's nice, whatever. But I feel like that dynamic island, Apple could have done a little bit of a better job. They could have made it a little bit smaller. But otherwise, this is still a good phone. I think it deserves to be in this lineup for sure. I think the 13 Pro to a 14 Pro, I think it was a bigger upgrade than the 11 Pro to the 12 Pro. Actually, I take that back. I think that was a decent upgrade. It was a bigger upgrade than the 10 to the 10S for sure. But I will say, still to this day, I think the jump from the 10S to the 11 Pro or the 12 Pro to the 13 Pro was probably one of the bigger upgrades here in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.